Hi, I'm Eric Houston, and this is Press Play, a show about movies. You know, I'm a big fan of classic television, and something that I'm always really fascinated by are TV shows that ran so long that they kind of become something else in their last season. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. Like Welcome Back, Kotter. The last season of Welcome Back, Kotter, Gabe Kaplan is barely on it, John Travolta's barely on it. They've introduced a character named Bo, who's like a new sweat hog. Stuff doesn't take place in the classroom really as much anymore. And like because Gabe Kaplan's on it so little, they give Mr. Woodman like all of the jokes at the end of the episodes. It's a really weird way to do that show. Or like Mayberry RFD, right? So that's the Andy Griffith show, but after years and years of doing the Andy Griffith show, Andy Griffith didn't want to do the show anymore, so they kept the show going under that new name so that we could still watch all of the side characters do stuff. Happy Days. You know, Richie isn't even in the last 4 years of the show. I think Ted McGinley joins the cast, and the Fonz has become like a high school teacher. And this is years after it had jumped the shark. Happy Days continued to be on TV for years still. And then another great example, Head of the Class. So that was the show, not unlike Welcome Back, Kotter, kind of backwards Welcome Back, Kotter, where Howard Hessman is the teacher for like the genius class. And, you know, it's a pretty good show. Unfortunately, it features at least one cast member who, you know, maybe didn't age great. But it's still a pretty fun show. And in the last season, Howard Hessman's not on it, and they bring in Billy Connolly to start teaching the class. It throws the whole show off of its creative axis as it becomes kind of less about the students and more about Billy Connolly, which is hard to deny. I remember watching the show at the time. I hadn't really watched much Head of the Class before, but I was really drawn to Billy Connolly. And he's such an electrifying performer that's easy to understand. So much so that then they ended Head of the Class and spun Billy Connolly as that same character into his own show in the sitcom Billy, which I remember being a huge fan of. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And I encountered it most recently watching Ally McBeal. Now, I was certainly aware of Ally McBeal at the time. Lawyer show, Dancing Baby, got it. But I didn't watch it. Recently, though, I watched the whole series. And the last season's a doozy, and I'll get to that in a minute. But to recap for those of you who aren't as familiar with Ally McBeal, it's a sort of comedy drama law show that takes place at this quirky law firm, Cajun Fish. Ally starts out the show as their newest attorney, and the show follows her professional and especially her romantic life as she's surrounded by a bunch of eccentric characters, including John Fish, or not, I don't think it's John, well, Fish. I forget what his first name is now. But a character who is, well, he's really into older ladies. John Cage, played by the great Peter MacNicol in probably one of his definitive roles as a great sort of eccentric, stuttering, you know, super genius lawyer with really kind of wacky ways of looking and doing at things, and an almost Columbo-like way of putting his opponents ill at ease by making himself seem like he doesn't know what's going on. There's all kinds of great characters on the show. Ally is herself a pretty terrific character. If I had a problem with the show, it was that sometimes I felt like the show was condescending to her in her romantic life and her quest to like find a person to be with. But it was overall a really enjoyable show. There were always like weird and interesting cases for them to work on. The characters were always engaging. I really enjoyed watching it, particularly a couple seasons in when Portia de Rossi and my favorite, Lucy Liu, joined the cast. So show's going great. The romance stuff by about season 4 was starting to wear a little bit thin. So in season 4, they add the guy who clearly the writers and producers, specifically David E. Kelley, who I believe wrote every episode of the series, or practically every episode, adds in a new character to be Ally's guy, like the guy who clearly David E. Kelley thinks she's going to end up with. And that's played by Robert Downey Jr. This was a complete surprise to me. I had no idea that Robert Downey Jr. was going to end up being in this show. And he's terrific in it. And he adds so much to the show. He is, at long last, a real kind of match for Ally. As a performer, he brings a lot of, he's really electric, and that's really fun to see. It's great to watch the different characters bounce off of him and all of that. He was a terrific addition that really rejuvenated the show. And as I understand it, the plan for the 5th and final season was to add him to the main cast, have him and Ally get married, and follow that as a storyline, which makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, this was during a time in Robert Downey Jr.'s career and life when his addictions were getting the better of him, and I believe he was arrested sometime between season 4 and season 5, making David E. Kelley have to scramble last minute to reconfigure season 5. And that gets me to the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about, which is the absolute huge wild swings that Ally McBeal takes in season 5. Season 5 starts off, it's pretty wild. We don't have Robert Downey Jr. anymore. Ally is dealing with life as somebody who's been broken up with, which is a mode we've seen her in quite a bit before. But now, all of a sudden, there's a bunch of new regular cast members hanging around the show. They've added a whole slew of lawyers in the form of Julianne Nicholson. You've probably seen her most recently on Hacks, where she played the hilarious dance mom character. Well, here she's sort of playing Ally McBeal 2.0. She's a very Ally style, insecure, romance-driven character who all of a sudden shows up in the law firm and who Ally sort of kind of takes under her wing. She's joined by kind of a slimy lawyer played by Josh Hopkins, who would later be a regular on Cougar Town as, I can't remember his character's name on Cougar Town, but he's one of the Cougar Towns. Slimy lawyer. He doesn't work at the law firm. He's a little bit of a weird addition. And then very much in the Robert Downey Jr. role is James Marsden, Cyclops from the X-Men, as the new hunky, movie star lawyer at the firm who has a past romantic relationship with Julianne Nicholson, which echoes the beginnings of the show when Ally was working with another lawyer with whom she had a long-standing romantic life with before they had broken up and he had gotten married to someone else. So it really seems like season 5 is kind of an attempt to reboot Ally McBeal and maybe set things up Mayberry RFD style for a version of Ally McBeal where Ally and a lot of the other regulars are gone and these new characters have taken over. You can also think of that last episode of Scrubs where there's all of a sudden a bunch of new Scrubs floating around, as if that's going to be what the show is going forward. It's a real wild swing, and it's hard to put too much intentionality on it and say for sure, oh, this is going to be the new cast of a new kind of Ally McBeal, because it got put together so last minute. So, ascribing that intentionality to it is, I think, probably a mistake. It is, however, nonetheless kind of fascinating. Equally fascinating is how it doesn't work at all. These characters and their storylines just feel like rehashes. There's a couple of characters who do work, one of which is Regina Hall, who floats in kind of mid-season. She brings a really good energy to the show, and she was a lot of fun to have around, and she sticks around for most of it. But as wild as all of that is, by mid-season, the show and David E. Kelley have decided to take another absolutely wild swing. He makes this decision to eject all of those new characters. They are gone by mid-season, which I would imagine involved some hefty contract payouts, as the show pivots again to become a show about Ally as a single mother. Now, there have been, ideas of Ally and kids and babies up until now, such as the famous dancing baby that would sort of haunt Ally in her regular delusions sometimes. But now Ally has a full-on child, and what's really wacky is this isn't a pregnancy storyline or anything like, or what would make, I think, a lot of sense, a time jump where you jump 5-10 years into the future to a time when Ally has a child. No. All of a sudden, one episode, this young woman, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, played by Hayden Panettiere from Heroes and Scream 4, which I liked her in a lot. She just shows up and says, "You're my mom." Ally's like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Well, when you were in college, you donated some eggs to some kind of a study. And they told you that they weren't going to do anything really with the eggs and that they would destroy them, but they didn't. And they used them for in vitro with my parents. Also, my parents are now dead somehow. So I'm looking for a new mom, and girl, it you." Wild. It is such a wild swing. And, you know, it does kind of work. Hayden is relatively charming, and she has good chemistry with Ally. And I like what David is trying to do here in growing Ally up. At the same time, she also becomes a partner at the firm and takes a leadership role there. So we've pivoted from insecure Ally to boss Ally, and that's sort of interesting. But the way that we get there is absolutely bananas. I can't imagine sitting around and thinking this up, especially when there are much simpler and more elegant ways to do it. But to just have this girl show up on her doorstep, and now Ally is her mom. Her other parents are dead, so there's no other choice. Ally has to be her mom. Her guardian is incidentally that lady, I don't know her name. She used to be on Caroline in the City. She was Caroline's like across the hall neighbor that was in Cats. Well, here she's also a singer. And, you know, she doesn't really have time to raise Hayden Panettiere because she wants to become like a lounge singer in New York, I guess. So, yeah. So Ally raises this kid. And then John Bon Jovi practically moves into her brownstone that she has just bought. Almost like Murphy Brown, because he's a handyman that now just like is around all of the time for a romance storyline that I am happy to say never, fully resolves into like a lasting relationship. It's wild. Now, there's one other really wild thing about the season that I want to talk to you about. And this, to me, was probably the one unqualified success of the season. And that is the addition of Dame Edna. Yes, that is correct. Dame Edna is on the show not just as a guest character, but as a recurring character who is in virtually every episode of at least the back half of the 5th season of Ally McBeal. So let's set the stage for you. If you don't know who Dame Edna is, Dame Edna she's a little bit difficult to describe. She's a comedian. She's essentially a drag character created by an Australian comedian named Barry Humphries. She started out in, I think, some comic strips, and then in a movie called The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, and then Barry Humphries built her out from there into being her own sort of force. A little bit like a somewhat doddering older version of Miss Piggy, a truly wonderful character, often with like this wonderful purple hair. Her catchphrase is "Hello, possums," and she's the absolute best. She's obviously a very eccentric presence, and she fits very well into the Ally McBeal world. She comes onto the show initially as a wealthy client involved in a class action lawsuit that Ally's firm is taking care of. Before you know it, though, she has somehow become like a personal assistant / office manager / secretary. And she, like I say, is in like every episode as this somewhat more demented Mrs. Doubtfire character who has all of her own, unusual romantic liaisons. As a Dame Edna fan, I was, for one thing, absolutely shocked that she was on the show at all, let alone that she became a regular character and that she's credited as Dame Edna. Like when you watch the credits, it comes up Dame Edna Everidge during the opening credits, and that's wild. In no small part because, I'm sorry, Virginia, there is no Dame Edna. She's a fictional character. And she definitely comes from a time in like the 80s and 90s when character comedians, at least in America, were a much bigger thing. And there was this handful of comedic personas who overshadowed their real life counterparts. I'm thinking about people like Pee Wee Herman. I'm thinking of Elvira. I'm thinking of Ernest P. Worrell. All characters with real people underneath them, but who would appear across multimedia, right? Who would have movies built around them and TV shows, but then would also be on talk shows as Ernest or as Pee Wee, as if they were people who existed in the world. Kind of like the Muppets almost. And it's a thing that I don't feel like the American media landscape really has anymore, but it's a thing I miss. And to have those multiple layers of reality, right? Where you have Dame Edna playing not herself, but a character on Ally McBeal. So that's like three deep, right? Barry Humphries is playing Dame Edna, who's playing whatever her character name is on Ally McBeal. It's absolutely bananas, but a lot of fun to watch, and Dame Edna brought a lot of much needed pizzazz into what was otherwise often a rote and sort of uneven season. So Ally McBeal, is this a show I would recommend watching? Yeah, I would. It was a lot of fun. If you like sort of a quirky legal drama or kind of romance, relationship-based workplace comedy, I think you would enjoy Ally McBeal. Would I recommend Ally McBeal Season 5? Well, that's a little bit harder of a thing to swallow. I would say that for most people, it's probably very missable. And to some extent, I think you would be better off ending after Season 4 and imagining the sort of what could have been. But for people like me who are fascinated about this kind of thing and are fascinated about the left-hand turns that popular TV shows can take, I think it's absolutely essential. I'll be back next time to talk to you about more movies and TV shows. Until then, stay safe, watch movies.